Good evening, America, and welcome to Just the News, Not Noise. Every weeknight, we're dedicated to bringing you information, not indoctrination, facts, not fiction. And we're very proud of that. Coming to you from our nation's capital, I'm John Solomon.
Good evening to all of you, and good evening to you, John. I am your co-host, Amanda Head, coming to you from the left coast of the country here in Los Angeles. John, while Americans are still stunned from that leak out of the Supreme Court, nevertheless, headlines and news marches on. A lot to talk about tonight.
There sure is, Amanda. Here at Just the News, we went through a lot of documentation, carefully reviewed this, and we have been able to prove that the Biden CDC had bought access to millions of Americans' phone records. They literally were tracking millions of Americans' phone records to see how well they were complying with the Biden lockdown orders during the COVID pandemic. A really extraordinary story. One of the many reasons why people are so worried about their freedom, their privacy in this administration. Meanwhile, as the U.S. Senate voted in a bipartisan format yesterday to fight the Biden mask mandate for toddlers, yes, Democrats, 7 of them, joined the Republicans in voting to overrule the Biden mandate for young children having to be forced to wear masks. An extraordinary thing. And we're pretty lucky to have joining with us right now our first guest, someone who knows something about the medical profession. He's an ophthalmologist. He's also the great senator from the state of Kentucky. Joining us right now, Senator Rand Paul. Senator, great to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me.
I want to start with your extraordinary exchanges yesterday with the Homeland Secretary, Mayorkas. You really questioned him about this disinformation board. You had a tweet this morning that I think summed up your argument best. No government, no political party should be the arbiter of truth. Tell us a little bit about those exchanges yesterday.
You know, the question I asked him is whether or not the Steele dossier represented Russian disinformation. You know, because if we can't even agree on whether or not that was Russian disinformation, how can we expect the Homeland Security to be policing this as if there was any sort of justification for it? But we can't even agree on that. He wouldn't admit that it was Russian disinformation, even though, you know, Horowitz is, I know you know this, but your viewers also probably know, when Horowitz, the investigator general, looked at the Steele dossier, he concluded that the FBI, even during the process of looking at it, that many in the FBI concluded or surmised that this was Russian disinformation. Christopher Steele, his sources, he admits, were Russians, high members of the Kremlin, he says. So here we have Russian disinformation involved in the election. And, you know, so it shows you how partisan this would end up being. You know, if you don't like the disinformation, or if it seems to be helping Republicans, they would censor it. If it seems to be helping Democrats, they wouldn't. This is why government shouldn't be involved in the censorship business. Now, Mayorkas responds by saying, oh, we just want to have guardrails. Well, I don't want to have guardrails. Guardrails sound to me like the rules on speech, and I don't want the government involved with creating the rules on speech.
Yeah, so important.
Yeah, and Senator, it feels like the government is telling us that we have always been at war with East Asia as far as the messaging, because people hear what they say and we see different things and it just doesn't line up. But one of my biggest concerns with respect to COVID is that Americans so willingly gave up freedoms. And as John was talking about with the location tracking of the Biden administration, it feels like we're now in a place where we can't ever go back to the era where we expected to have privacy from our government. Can we?
Yeah, and this is sort of the debate with Mayorkas. It's a slippery slope of where they go. So when I ask him about disinformation, he says, well, we want to stop people who are saying that the vaccine has fentanyl in it, which is an absurdity. And I'm not sure if anybody in the country actually believes that. But the thing is there's nothing that stops government from making pronouncements. So if in general there is some sort of untruth out there and the government wants to say, hey, this is not true, you know, the vaccine is, you know, safe, that's fine. But what if the next step is that I say, which I often say, that pre-existing immunity, the immunity you get from prior infection, is as good as the vaccine or better and should be accounted for in making a decision whether you want more vaccines, boosters, how old you are. What if that is next branded as disinformation, as many in big tech have done? So I think it is a slippery slope to the point where what happened to me with YouTube. I said cloth masks don't work, and they don't, and I was kicked off YouTube for it or taken down or censored. I don't want the government involved in that business. I hate the idea that big tech does it, but I'm absolutely adamant that government shouldn't do it.
Yeah, it's remarkable how far that slope has tipped in the last few years too. So you have been such a champion of freedom, and I want to ask you about this new capability that the government has, which is just to go out and buy Americans' records without a warrant, put together your life pattern based on where your cell phone was, location data. If Republicans get in control of Congress, are you going to take a look at those sort of capabilities and try to rein in the ability of the government to track people by their cell phone?
Yes. In fact, this goes back to Edward Snowden when he was the whistleblower that revealed that the government was collecting not just a little bit of our data, but almost all of our data. Now, they kind of justify it and they say, oh, it's not your conversation. We're not really spying on your conversation. It's your metadata. But interestingly, when people look at it, researchers have determined they can tell more about you from your metadata than your conversations. So if they know how long you talk to people and who you talk to. So, for example, if metadata includes your doctors, and I can look at all of your phone calls and how long you talk to them, I can tell what a lot of your medical diseases are. I can tell maybe if you have something that you don't want the public to know, a certain doctor that you see. If I look at your visa bill, I can see if your medications and what your medications are. I can see what you read. So I don't actually have to, actually hear your conversation. There were researchers that looked at the metadata that when Edward Snowden revealed this, that said that you could tell over 80% of the time what religion people were. So you can evade their religious sphere, their medical sphere, their health sphere, their reading habits. It's a terrible thing to do, and government should not be allowed to do this. Now, some sort of people say, well, it's just open market. It's free market things. When the government does it, and when the government is trying to snoop on your behavior, it's wrong, and there should be laws against it.
Absolutely. Yeah. It feels like a little bit there are two Americas, because we've got a group of people who, as you talked about at a recent event, 97% of free people on planes have ditched the masks. They say no more. I walk out in California. It's a liberal state. Most people aren't wearing masks yet. As John cited at the top of the block, you've got Pfizer seeking the booster for kids age 5 to 11. The Biden administration is fighting the lifting of the mask mandate. We've got two different Americas. Going into fall, into midterms, do you expect to go more in one direction or the other?
I suspect this will lead to the wipeout of the Democrats in both the House and the Senate, because look, do they want to go against 97% of us getting on planes and force 97% of the public, to be back wearing a mask? But you have to also realize the arrogance of people like Dr. Fauci. His comment the other day is alarming, and we should emphasize this until everybody knows it. He said that the courts have no business overturning his mandates. The courts have no business reviewing his mandates. Another way of saying that is, the courts adjudicate the Constitution. He's saying the Constitution has no business looking at the mandates that he puts on individual or free choice. This is alarmingly arrogant. This is something we've never, ever seen. And he should be, rousted from public debate. He should not be acceptable in public debate at all. I'm not talking about through government. I'm talking through public opinion. Public opinion should rebuke a person who doesn't respect the courts, doesn't respect the Constitution, and doesn't respect the individual, and has such arrogance that he believes he is the science, and that if you disrespect him or you question his edicts, you're questioning science. That is an arrogance we have never, ever seen, but that is an arrogance, this surety of your moral rightness. That's the worst type of dictator to get, the one who actually believes that they are somehow morally superior to the rest of us.
That philosophy seems to be spreading across Washington dangerously. Senator, you have been one of the most determined voices in getting to the bottom of where COVID originated and whether the Americans had some role in funding a lab where it could have escaped from. You mentioned if you get a committee chair, you are going to lead this. Why is getting to the bottom of this so important, and what will you do to get that answer?
Well, think about this. Democrats go crazy having committee hearings on whether or not plastic in baby bottles is causing cancer. And I've gone along with the hearings to try to learn more about it. We haven't had one hearing. 6 million people died from this pandemic. Across the world, 6 million people, 1 million people, more than 1 million in America died. We haven't had one congressional hearing on where the virus came from. And it started out with a cover-up. So I will subpoena all of Fauci's records, all of his cohorts and his Alterman, all the people that were involved in this. I will subpoena all of those records. But the reason I want to get to the bottom of this is not just to have accountability for those who covered this up, but to try to make sure this didn't happen again. Even the generalized left-wing media is 50-50 now. They've come to the point where they're 50-50 on it coming from the lab. I'm sort of 95-5. I think it's a 95% chance it came from the lab. But the thing is this could happen again. This disease, this COVID pandemic, had a 1% mortality, but that's 6 million people have died. What if we have a virus released from a lab accidentally that has a 15% mortality? The earlier SARS had a 15% mortality back in 2004. The MERS, the MERS, which is another coronavirus about that time that was transmitted in the Middle East by camels, that one had a 50% mortality. We have people in China that were experimenting with MERS, MERS, with a 50% mortality, taking unknown proteins from a bat cave from other coronaviruses, mixing them together to say, hey, wonder what happens. Wonder if it's going to be more or less dangerous. And then according to Fauci, if you're not predicting that it's going to be more dangerous, it's not gain of function. My point is if it's unknown and you're mixing together two unknowns and one is already lethal, that it's a death wish. It's a death wish for civilization. And can you imagine? All you have to do is read stories of the 14th century and what the plague did there when a third of Europe died. It devastated and it put us back several hundred years. Think of the Einsteins.
Unfortunately, sir, we're bumping up against a commercial break. We want to keep this going, but we'll have you back soon. Thank you, sir, very much. All right, folks, we'll be right back.